10 dangerous types of people you must ignore. We all have that feeling, that gut instinct when someone just isn't right for our lives. Maybe it's the colleague who always leaves you feeling drained, or the friend who somehow turns every success of yours into something about them, or that family member whose drama constantly pulls you into their chaos. Yet despite these warning signs, we often ignore our instincts and keep these people in our lives. We make excuses. They don't mean it. That's just how they are. But they're family. What if I told you that some relationships aren't just difficult? They're actively dangerous to your mental health, your goals, and your future? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're tackling something many of us struggle with, but few want to discuss openly: the types of people who might be secretly sabotaging your life. Now, let me be clear. This isn't about writing people off over minor annoyances or disagreements. We're talking about consistent patterns of behavior that drain your energy, undermine your confidence, and hold you back from your potential. And here's the truth that took me years to learn. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do isn't to keep trying with toxic people. It's to recognize when someone doesn't deserve your attention and to redirect that precious energy toward people and pursuits that lift you higher. Before we dive in, I want you to know something important. If you recognize someone in your life in this video, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to cut them out completely. Sometimes creating healthy distance, setting better boundaries, or changing how you interact can be enough. But first, you need to identify who these people are. And that's exactly what we're about to explore. So grab something to take notes with, because these insights might just change your life. Let's get started. Type 1. The emotional vampire. The first dangerous type of person you need to recognize is what psychologists often call the emotional vampire. These people literally drain your emotional energy. After spending time with them, you feel exhausted, depleted, and sometimes even physically tired without understanding why. Here's how to spot them. Every conversation revolves around their problems. They have an endless supply of crises and emergencies. And while they always want your support, advice, and emotional labor, they rarely, if ever, reciprocate. What makes them truly dangerous is their subtlety. Unlike obvious toxic people, emotional vampires often appear as friends, confidants, or people who just need a little help. They're not always negative. They can be charismatic, interesting, and even supportive occasionally, just enough to keep you coming back. I remember Sarah, a close friend who always seemed to be in crisis. Every lunch became a therapy session about her problems. At first, I felt good being there for her. But eventually, I noticed a pattern. I'd leave our meetings feeling completely drained, while my own needs went consistently unaddressed. The real damage happens over time. These relationships create a slow leak in your emotional reserves, leaving you with less energy for your own goals, dreams, and the people who genuinely support you. Warning signs: you're dealing with an emotional vampire. You feel physically tired after interactions with them. You start dreading their calls or messages. They rarely ask about your life. And when they do, they quickly redirect the conversation back to themselves. Your problems seem to inconvenience them, while their problems are always emergencies. They contact you primarily when they need something. How to handle them? The key with emotional vampires is boundaries. Limit your time with them and be intentional about when you engage. Practice phrases like, "I only have 15 minutes to talk right now," or "I'm not in a space to discuss this topic today." Remember, you can have compassion for someone without making yourself responsible for their emotional well-being. Type 2. The chronic critic. The second dangerous type is the chronic critic. The person who always finds something wrong with what you're doing, saying, wearing, or thinking. Their criticism rarely comes as constructive feedback aimed at helping you improve. Instead, it manifests as backhanded compliments, just joking put-downs, or constant questioning of your decisions. Constructive criticism focuses on the action and offers specific suggestions for improvement. Chronic criticism focuses on you as a person and offers vague disapproval, designed to make you doubt yourself. What makes chronic critics Particularly dangerous is how they gradually erode your self-confidence. After enough exposure to their negativity, you start internalizing their voice, second-guessing your own judgment and abilities. I experienced this with a former mentor who I initially respected greatly. While he occasionally offered valuable advice, I began noticing that nothing I did was ever quite good enough. Each accomplishment was met with, "Yes, but," followed by what I could have done better. Over time, I became paralyzed by perfectionism, afraid to start projects without his approval, and constantly seeking validation that never fully came. It took years to recognize that this relationship was actually holding me back rather than helping me grow. Warning signs: you're dealing with a chronic critic. You feel like you're walking on eggshells around them. You've started hiding your achievements or decisions from them. Their advice leaves you feeling worse, not motivated. They rarely acknowledge your growth or successes. You find yourself adopting their critical voice in your own head. How to handle them? With chronic critics, you need to trust your own judgment. Ask yourself, is this feedback helping me grow, or is it just making me feel inadequate? If it's the latter, create distance. When you can't avoid interaction, try redirecting conversations away from evaluation and judgment. And remember, you don't need to justify your choices to someone whose primary goal seems to be finding fault with them. Type 3, the competitive friend. The third dangerous type might surprise you because they often appear as close friends, the competitive friend. Healthy competition can push us to be better, but competitive friends aren't interested in mutual growth. They're playing a zero-sum game where your success somehow diminishes theirs. Here's what makes them particularly dangerous. These relationships often start genuinely. You may have real history and connection with this person, but as one or both of you begin to achieve success, something shifts. They might downplay your achievements with comments like "you got lucky," or "anyone could do that with your advantages." They might try to one-up your good news with their own, or most insidiously, they might show excessive enthusiasm that feels hollow and forced. I experienced this with Alex, a friend from college. We started our careers around the same time and initially supported each other, but I noticed a pattern. Whenever I shared a professional win, he would quickly change the subject or find a way to mention something more impressive that he had accomplished. At first, I brushed it off, but the dynamic became increasingly uncomfortable when he began making subtle comments, questioning whether I deserved my successes. What hurt most was realizing that someone I considered a friend wasn't genuinely happy for me. Warning signs: you're dealing with a competitive friend. They seem uncomfortable or quickly change the subject when you share good news. They frequently compare their situation to yours. They point out flaws in your achievements or the downsides of your good fortune. They copy your goals or pursuits but frame it as competition rather than shared interest. You find yourself downplaying your successes around them to avoid tension. How to handle them? With competitive friends, be strategic about what you share. You don't need to hide your successes, but recognize that they may not be the right audience for your celebrations. If you value the friendship, try having an honest conversation about how their reactions make you feel. Some people aren't aware of their competitive tendencies and can change with feedback. Others may not be capable of this level of self-reflection, in which case creating distance might be necessary. Remember, true friends celebrate your victories as if they were their own. Type 4, the perpetual victim. The fourth dangerous type is the perpetual victim. Someone for whom everything is always happening to them, never because of them. These individuals have a remarkable ability to avoid responsibility. No matter the situation, they can explain how they were wronged, misunderstood, or treated unfairly. Everyone else is to blame: their boss, the economy, their ex, their parents, the system. What makes perpetual victims particularly dangerous is their resistance to solutions. Offer advice, and they'll explain why it won't work. Share a similar experience you overcame, and they'll explain why their situation is uniquely impossible. The real danger comes when you get pulled into their narrative. Their worldview is contagious. Spend enough time with someone who sees themselves as powerless, and you'll start questioning your own agency too. I had a colleague, Jamie, who embodied this perfectly. Every project obstacle was because of unreasonable clients. Every missed deadline was due to others not providing what she needed. Every piece of feedback was evidence that management was out to get her. At first, I sympathized, but over time, I noticed that people with equal or greater challenges were finding ways to succeed, while Jamie remained stuck in the same complaints. When I started feeling cynical about my own work after our conversations, I realized her perspective was affecting mine. Warning signs. You're dealing with a perpetual victim. They have elaborate explanations for why nothing is their fault. They resist practical solutions or advice. They tell stories where they're always the hero or martyr, never the flawed human. Similar problems recur throughout their life with different people. After talking with them, you feel hopeless or cynical about your own situations. How to handle them? With perpetual victims, avoid getting pulled into the "it's not fair" narrative. Acknowledge their feelings briefly, then redirect to solutions or change the subject entirely. Remember that you can't help someone who's more invested in their problem than in solving it. Your empathy is valuable. Reserve it for those who will use it as support for growth, not as fuel for stagnation. Type 5. The Chaos Creator. The fifth dangerous type is the Chaos Creator, someone who seems to live in a perpetual state of drama, crisis, and upheaval. If their life resembles a reality TV show with constant conflicts, betrayals, and emergencies, you're likely dealing with a Chaos Creator. While they often frame themselves as unlucky or targeted by fate, the common denominator in all their dramatic situations is them. What makes Chaos Creators particularly dangerous is how they normalize instability. In their world, extreme emotional highs and lows, broken relationships, and crisis management are just how life is. The longer you spend in their reality, the more you start accepting chronic stress and drama as inevitable. I had a friend, Megan, whose life was a constant roller coaster. Every week brought a new crisis, relationship explosions, workplace confrontations, friendship betrayals. At first, I was the supportive friend, always available to talk through the latest disaster. But I started noticing patterns. Situations would escalate because of choices she made. Conflicts would arise with vastly different people in almost identical ways. And the time between crises kept shrinking. Most telling was how calm my life became once we drifted apart. I realized how much of her chaos had been spilling into my own emotional state. Warning signs: you're dealing with a chaos creator. Their stories often involve extreme situations and emotions. They have frequent fallouts with friends, romantic partners, or colleagues. They call or message at odd hours with urgent problems. They make impulsive decisions with predictably negative outcomes. You feel anxious when seeing their name on your phone. How to handle them? With chaos creators, maintain strong boundaries. Be clear about when you're available and what kind of support you can offer. Avoid getting emotionally invested in their latest crisis. Offer objective perspective instead of getting pulled into the drama. Most importantly, pay attention to how you feel after interactions. If you consistently feel anxious, drained, or like you've been through an emotional ringer, that's valuable information about the toll this relationship is taking. Type 6. The Manipulator. The sixth dangerous type is perhaps the most difficult to identify: the manipulator. Unlike more obvious toxic personalities, skilled manipulators can appear charming, reasonable, and even supportive while subtly controlling situations and people to serve their own interests. Manipulators are masters of subtle tactics, guilt trips, gaslighting, making you question your own reality, strategic helplessness, and creating false emergencies that require your immediate attention. What makes them particularly dangerous is their ability to make you feel like the problem. When you try to establish boundaries or question their behavior, they'll often twist the situation until you're the one apologizing. I encountered a masterful manipulator in David, a former supervisor. He presented himself as a mentor who had my best interests at heart, but I gradually noticed how his guidance always seemed to benefit him. When I accomplished something noteworthy, he would remind me how his advice made it possible. When I raised concerns about workload, he would mention how disappointed he was that I wasn't as dedicated as he thought. When I established boundaries around after-hours communication, he implied I wasn't a team player. The most insidious part? I often left these conversations feeling guilty and questioning whether I was the problem. It took distance from the relationship to recognize the manipulation for what it was. Warning signs. You're dealing with a manipulator. You often feel confused after interactions, like something's off, but you can't quite identify what. You find yourself apologizing for having reasonable needs or boundaries. They use phrases like, "if you really cared about me," or "after all I've done for you." They keep score and remind you of past favors when they want something. Information gets twisted in conversations. What you said isn't quite what they heard. Their words and actions don't align consistently. How to handle them? With manipulators, documentation is your friend. After conversations, write down what was said and agreed to. This helps combat gaslighting and provides clarity when they try to rewrite history. Trust your feelings. That sense of confusion or discomfort is your intuition, signaling something isn't right. And whenever possible, have witnesses present for important discussions to reduce the opportunity for manipulation. Most importantly, recognize that skilled manipulators rarely change. Your best protection is often distance and minimal engagement. Type 7, the envious underminer. The seventh dangerous type is the envious underminer, someone who can't genuinely celebrate your success because they're too focused on what they lack. Unlike the competitive friend who makes everything a contest, underminers operate more covertly. They might offer helpful advice that actually creates doubt, spread rumors or negative information about you to others, or subtly sabotage your efforts while maintaining plausible deniability. What makes underminers particularly dangerous is their ability to operate under the radar. Their sabotage is often so subtle that confronting them makes you look paranoid or overly sensitive. Many will even position themselves as allies and supporters until you achieve something they wanted for themselves. I experienced this with a colleague I'll call Rachel. On the surface, she was supportive and friendly, but I noticed a pattern where opportunities I mentioned to her would somehow fall through, or crucial information wouldn't reach me if it passed through her. The most revealing moment came when I received a significant promotion. Her congratulations seemed sincere, until I learned she had been telling others. I got the position because of connections rather than merit. The contrast between her public support and private undermining was striking. Warning signs. You're dealing with an envious underminer. They give backhanded compliments. Congratulations on the promotion. It's surprising they didn't require more experience. Information or opportunities get lost when passing through them. They share your ideas or achievements with others without giving you credit. They emphasize the downsides of your successes. Won't your new job take you away from your family more? Other people seem to have negative preconceptions about you that trace back to this person. How to handle them? With underminers, information control is key. Be strategic about what you share with them, especially regarding opportunities, achievements, and goals. Build direct relationships with important contacts rather than relying on them as intermediaries. When possible, document your work and contributions, clearly to prevent them from taking credit or diminishing your role. And remember that your success is the best response to their undermining. Focus on excellence rather than retaliation. Type 8, the controller. The eighth dangerous type is the controller, someone with an excessive need to dictate how things should be done, by whom and when. Controllers struggle with trust and uncertainty. They believe that for something to be done right, they must oversee every detail. This manifests in various ways: micromanaging, giving unsolicited advice, making decisions for others, or creating rigid expectations about how people should behave. What makes controllers particularly dangerous is how they stifle growth and autonomy. Their constant oversight sends the message that you're not capable of making good decisions, gradually eroding your confidence and independence. I dealt with a controller in my personal life, a family member who had very specific ideas about everything from my career path to how I should organize my kitchen cabinets. Their advice always came from a place of caring, which made it difficult to reject without seeming ungrateful. What I eventually realized was that their need to control wasn't really about me at all. It was about managing their own anxiety, but the impact was real. I had started second-guessing even minor decisions and feeling guilty when I didn't follow their advice. Warning signs. You're dealing with a controller. They offer detailed advice on matters that should be your decision. They express disappointment or concern when you don't follow their guidance. They create emergencies from situations that don't warrant urgency. They check up on you frequently under the guise of just making sure. They use phrases like, "I'm just trying to help," when you establish boundaries. They become anxious or irritated when plans change unexpectedly. How to handle them? With controllers, establishing and maintaining clear boundaries is essential. Practice phrases like, "I appreciate your concern, but I've made my decision," or "I'll consider that, but ultimately this is my choice to make." Remember that their controlling behavior usually stems from anxiety, not malice. This doesn't excuse the behavior, but understanding it can help. You respond with firmness and compassion rather than defensiveness. Most importantly, trust your own judgment. The more you practice making decisions without their approval, the more confident you'll become in your own capabilities. Type 9, the chronic complainer. The ninth dangerous type is the chronic complainer. Someone for whom nothing is ever quite right, and everything is a potential source of dissatisfaction. Unlike people who occasionally vent or express legitimate concerns, chronic complainers have made negativity their default mode of engagement with the world. Weather, politics, service at restaurants, colleagues, traffic, all are targets for their perpetual dissatisfaction. What makes chronic complainers particularly dangerous is the contagious nature of negativity. Psychological research consistently shows that negative emotions spread more readily than positive ones. A phenomenon known as negative emotional contagion. Spend enough time with a chronic complainer, and you'll find your own perspective shifting toward cynicism. I had a close friend who gradually transformed into a chronic complainer over several years. What started as occasional venting evolved until nearly every conversation revolved around what was wrong with the world, their job, other people, or current events. The real wake-up call came during a week when we had daily contact. By the fifth day, I realized my own thoughts had become predominantly negative. I was seeing problems everywhere and feeling pessimistic about situations that normally wouldn't bother me. That's when I understood how powerfully their negativity was affecting my own outlook. Warning signs. You're dealing with a chronic complainer. They rarely talk about what's going well or what they're grateful for. Solutions don't interest them as much as elaborating on problems. They use phrases like, "That's just how it is," or "nothing ever changes." Conversations with them consistently leave you feeling more negative. They find flaws even in positive situations or good news. They bond with others primarily through shared complaints. How to handle them? With chronic complainers, redirect and reframe. When they begin complaining, acknowledge briefly, then pivot to either solutions or completely different topics. You might say, "That sounds frustrating. Have you considered?" Or, "Speaking of work, did you hear about?" You can also set conversational boundaries. "I've been working on focusing more on positive things lately. Could we talk about something that's going well?" Remember that chronic complaining is often a habit rather than a conscious choice. Some people aren't aware of how negative their communication has become and might appreciate gentle feedback if delivered with compassion. Type 10, the underminer of growth. The 10th and final dangerous type is the underminer of growth, someone who, consciously or unconsciously, works to keep you exactly where you are, regardless of your own desires for change and improvement. These people might be family members who question your new healthy habits, friends who pressure you to break your sobriety, or colleagues who mock your professional development efforts. Their message, whether subtle or overt, is clear. Don't change. Don't grow. Stay the same. What makes growth underminers particularly dangerous is how they appeal to your comfort zone and identity. They'll remind you of who you've always been or emphasize how change might threaten your relationships. This taps into our deep human fears of isolation and identity loss. I encountered this when I decided to pursue a career change that required significant additional education. Several people in my life subtly undermined this decision with comments like, "Are you sure you want to start over at your age?" Or, "You've never been much of a student though, have you?" What I eventually realized was that my growth threatened them, either because it highlighted their own stagnation or because they benefited from the dynamics of our existing relationship. My change meant they would need to change too, and not everyone is ready for that. Warning signs. You're dealing with a growth underminer. They remind you of past failures when you share new goals. They emphasize potential downsides of positive changes you're making. They use phrases like, "You're just not that type of person," or "I like the old you better." They create emergencies or demands when you're focusing on growth activities. They make jokes at the expense of your new habits or aspirations. They seem uncomfortable or change the subject when you talk about your progress. How to handle them. With growth underminers, be selective about what you share. Not everyone deserves a front-row seat to your evolution. Consider who has earned the right to hear about your dreams and transformations. Create boundaries around your growth activities. This might mean turning off notifications during study time, declining invitations that conflict with your new priorities, or limiting time with people who drain your motivation. Most importantly, find a community that supports your direction. The journey of growth is challenging enough without having to constantly defend it to others. Surround yourself with people who believe in your potential and celebrate your progress. Conclusion. As we've explored these 10 dangerous types of people, you might have recognized someone in your life or perhaps even aspects of yourself in certain relationships. That recognition is valuable. Awareness is always the first step toward change. Let's quickly review the types we've covered. The emotional vampire who drains your energy. The chronic critic who erodes your confidence. The competitive friend who can't celebrate your success. The perpetual victim who refuses responsibility. The chaos creator who normalizes constant drama. The manipulator who controls through subtle tactics. The envious underminer who sabotages your success. The controller who stifles your autonomy. The chronic complainer who spreads negativity. The underminer of growth who keeps you stagnant. Now here's what I want you to remember. Identifying these people isn't about judgment or blame. It's about making conscious choices about who gets access to your time, energy, and emotional resources. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do, both for yourself and others, is to create distance that allows everyone to grow in their own way, on their own path. I want to acknowledge something important. Creating boundaries with people, especially those we care about, isn't easy. It can involve difficult conversations, feelings of guilt, and sometimes significant life changes. That's okay. Growth rarely feels comfortable in the moment. But I can tell you from both personal experience and from the countless stories shared with me by viewers, the space that opens up in your life when you stop pouring energy into draining relationships becomes filled with possibilities you couldn't previously imagine. If you found value in this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing for more content on building a healthier, more intentional life. I've also created a free downloadable guide on setting boundaries with difficult people that expands on the strategies mentioned today. You'll find the link in the description. I'm curious, which of these types have you encountered in your own life? And how did you handle the situation? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, remember, you can't control who walks into your life, but you can decide who you allow to stay.